Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Casual Causal Talk, episode 13. Today, we have with us a very special guest, Dr. Igor Shuryak. He is not only a PhD, but also a clinically certified doctor. Dr. Igor, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much, Venkata. It's great, and I'm very happy to be here.
Most welcome. Dr. Igor, tell us about your career journey. How did a doctor become interested in statistics and causality?
Yes, actually, I have a kind of interdisciplinary background, which involves biology and medicine and modeling as well. And since being a kid, I was fascinated with mathematics, with programming, and with medicine, especially combining these things together. So I did BA in biology, and then I did MD training. But actually, I was less interested in clinical practice and more interested in research. So I switched more to research direction, and then I went for a PhD in environmental health sciences. And the focus of that PhD was mechanistic modeling of radiation-induced cancers.
Mm-hmm.
And radiation, I think, is a very interesting case because it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's definitely used to treat cancers, but also it's a mutagenic and carcinogenic agent. So it can induce new cancers, it can kill and damage cells. So there's always a fine balance in it. That's what's fascinated me.
Very
And
interesting.
then, yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, please
And
go ahead.
then about causality, because of the mechanistic modeling work, usually causality is kind of implicit in that. Like you make, say, a system of differential equations, and where each term, each parameter has some kind of usually causal meaning. Let's say this is a mortality rate for the cells after being irradiated. And you can interpret it that way. But then over especially last 5-7 years, when machine learning is exploding and it made its way more and more into medicine and biology, I started reading literature on this and came across, more or less accidentally, some causal ML papers. I think the first one I came across was double machine learning. And then I immediately realized that this seems very relevant to situations which are very common in biomedical research, where the data is not really experimental, it's not randomized, it's just observational. So there could be a lot of confounding going on. So this type of hybrid of causal inference and ML flexibility seemed really promising, and I started to read more.
Yeah, very interesting. Does your doctorate have any connection with your radiology oncology practice currently?
Well, actually, I'm in the radiation oncology department, but I'm not practicing. I'm not really treating patients.
Okay.
But I'm doing research in that department. So I collaborate with the physicians who treat, but also with experimental scientists.
Understood. Your profile is certainly very impressive, and the description of what you do stands out. I'm just going to read it out for the benefit of the audience. My main research focus involves quantitatively modeling the biological effects of ionizing radiation, including tumor control in radiation oncology, radiation carcinogenesis, biodisymmetry, non-targeted effects, and radiation resistance mechanisms. This work relies on implementation of applied mathematics, programming, statistics, and machine learning using languages such as R, Python, and Maple. Would you like to elaborate a bit on this? It's very interesting, I would say.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's kind of an interdisciplinary niche that I'm working on, which has to do with different radiation effects. So tumor control, what this means is that radiotherapy protocols are used to kill tumors. And often they're given as fractions, not as one single dose, but say fractions over several days or several weeks. And they're increasingly sophisticated techniques to target the tumor and not target and spare the surrounding normal organs. And some recent techniques are adaptive radiotherapy, where patient is imaged every day and the plan is changed every day. So it's very sophisticated and requires accurate targeting and prediction of the effects of the radiation dose. Carcinogenesis is the other double-edged sword part, because, for example, if normal organs are exposed, it's possible to induce a second cancer by mutating cells in that organ. And this is also a potential problem, especially in patients who can live a long life, like, say, their childhood cancer survivors, or also if it's exposure that's not medical, for example, occupational or accidental or anything like this. And biodisymmetry is actually an interesting inverse problem that's used for disaster preparedness. For example, in the case of a disaster where there would be some kind of nuclear accident or some kind of malicious attack by a terrorist or by another country involving radiation, many patients would potentially come to treatment centers and they think they're exposed to radiation, or they really are, and it's not known how much dose they received and what treatment they need, if any. And so the inverse problem is that you use biomarkers, for example, measured in blood or saliva or urine, and based on that, you use a model to predict what the dose was, like how severe the damage was and what treatment is needed. And then radiation resistance, of course, probably is relatively self-explanatory. It means how cells can survive and resist the effects of radiation and kind of adapt to it. And this involves cancers and also other different organisms that can adapt using various repair pathways. So what I'm working on is different types of approaches that bridge these biology processes with mathematics, computations, ML.
Generally speaking, people have a very fearful outlook towards radiation. Of course, the general public do not understand whether radiation is ionizing or non-ionizing. And of course, in popular culture, we have had, this Chernobyl, documentary on Netflix. And of course, people are really skeptical about radiation in general or nuclear, energy in general. Can you talk a bit more about, the difference between ionizing radiation and non-ionizing radiation?
Yes, sure. So ionizing means that it's energetic enough to ionize atoms, to break bonds, to eject electrons. So this usual forms of this are X-rays, for example, that are used for medical imaging, and CTs, gamma rays that are emitted by various radioactive substances. There also could be charged particles, for example, protons, or could be alpha particles. Alpha particles also can be emitted by various isotopes. And also could be cosmic rays, which is relevant, for example, for space travel, travel to other planets as well. And non-ionizing radiation would be less energetic. For example, visible light, for example, UV radiation, radio waves.
Understood. Let's talk a bit more specifics. Where and how does statistics and applied mathematics help in the field of radiation oncology?
Yeah, so it's very important. Of course, it's used in many places in radiation oncology with all kinds of data analysis. I think actually it's very crucial for modeling treatment effects and optimizing treatment effects quantitatively. And yeah, so especially the causal part of it. Like I said, I encountered the ML, like causal ML literature. And some of the reasons why I think it's important here is that usually doctors are taught that RCTs are the gold standard. Like RCTs, and especially meta-analysis of several RCTs, are the most reliable evidence, more reliable than any retrospective studies. And of course, randomization is extremely powerful, but there are a lot of limitations where it cannot really be done. For example, ethics reasons. For example, if you know that the treatment is really suboptimal, you cannot test it. Or if there are some delays in the treatment, you cannot, you cannot introduce, for example, deliberately delays. And there's cost and time and so on. So I think there is a gap, and definitely statistics and mathematics, and especially the causal thinking, can come in very useful to use the other non-randomized data, which is very abundant, or to combine RCT with non-RCT data when it's available, say, for a given disease.
Great. Was there ever a causal moment in your career where you kind of pivoted towards, modeling, experimentation, and causal inference in your research?
Yes, so in a sense, it was implicit in the mechanistic work. And then the causal ML literature. I guess the reason that I realized that the causal ML is important, because in the mechanistic model thinking, simplicity was usually emphasized more. Like basically those models, to be stable, should have only a few parameters, and you have a clear meaning for what each parameter is. And preferably, if you can, you don't even fit it completely in a data-driven way, but you estimate it from some literature, like some experiments. Even if you can't estimate a point value, estimate a range. Say the mortality rate for cells is this or this to this per day, or the growth rate is between this and this, and so on. So basically, you're fitting a relatively simple equation or set of equations and interpreting it in this causal way. But the limitation of that, of course, is that the new data that appears, especially like electronic health records, or also experimental data, is getting richer and richer, having more and more features. For example, various omics analysis, genomics, metabolomics. There is also a lot of imaging in the clinic, a lot of text, doctor's notes, all kind of free text inputs. And of course, it's obvious that the simple models cannot handle this. So all this is getting ignored. So that's where the hybridization with ML is definitely needed, I think. And that's what made me realize that this combination is promising.
You have been a prolific, adopter of causal methods. I can see it on your LinkedIn profile. You keep up, sharing a lot of articles around causal inference. What is causality according to you? Can you explain in 3 levels of difficulty? I asked this to all our, participants. This is basically, taken from or inspired from The Wired. If you could explain causality in 3 levels, that is starting from the grandma level, and then the college fresher level, and lastly, the causal expert level. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, of course. I think it's definitely important to explain this to all types of people with all types of backgrounds. So at the kind of beginner level, in a sense, I think causality is meaning that one thing is directly causing another thing. Like something that comes to mind is, say, a virus is causing a cold. Like there's definitely, say, an infection agent which is causing a disease. And this is separate and distinct from correlation, which I think at the beginner level, not all people realize. And correlation means that things happen together, like tend to happen together often, but it doesn't necessarily mean that one causes another. It might, but might not. And for example, during like autumn and winter time, like we have here, people often, like more often visit doctor's offices. They have more colds, and they, for example, drink more tea as well. But definitely, like say, drinking tea does not cause you to have a cold. And drinking tea does not cause you to go to the doctor. It's actually the cold that causes you to go to the doctor and potentially to drink tea because you feel better in that sense. So correlation of these three things, but the causal structure is actually separate. And then at a slightly more advanced level, like for example, student level, I think it's important to say that correlation is relatively easy to measure in the data that you have. Like, for example, you can use Pearson's or Spearman's methods or some other methods. So having data is enough to check whether things are correlated or not. But causation, of course, is much more tricky. Just using your data is generally not enough to tell whether one thing is causing another. I mean, there are causal discovery methods which try to do this, but in general, it's a much harder problem. And usually domain knowledge, like external knowledge separate from that data is needed to figure out what's going on. And also there's a concept of confounding, meaning that there can be hidden factors that affect, say, both the things you're studying, both the outcome and the kind of causal variable or the treatment or the exposure. For example, which often comes up in my medical setting is that treatment assignment depends on disease severity. Say more severe disease, you give a bigger dose of treatment, or you give a different treatment, add something else, another drug or something like this, that for a less severe patient would not be given. And this can mislead a lot if you naively use correlation, because a naive correlation in this case often tells you that having more intense treatment is correlated with worse outcome, like shorter survival time. But actually, of course, the confounder is the severe disease. So you need causal thinking and methods to disentangle this and to figure out that the disease severity can be a confounder. And then at the even more advanced level, you can visualize these things using DAGs. I mean, you can do it without DAGs with structural equations, but DAGs, I think, are visually useful because, like people say, picture is often worth 1,000 words. If you can draw it, it kind of seems to make more sense. You could think more easily about it. So a DAG is a directed acyclic graph where there are nodes and arrows, and the nodes are the variables or the features. And say one of the nodes is the outcome, one is the treatment, and the other variables are potential confounders or mediators or other things. And acyclic means that the arrows only go one way, like there shouldn't be a complete cycle, like a reverse causation in this diagram. And then at a more advanced level as well, that go over these different causal methods, like propensity scores, like all these other ML methods that are now rapidly developing.
Yeah, we'll touch upon all that later down the segment. Earlier, you remarked that RCTs are not possible in radiation oncology, obviously for ethical reasons. But that leads to the question of what quasi-causal experiments do you use at radiation oncology department?
Yeah, so this is an important question. Obviously, RCTs are not ethical in a sense that you wouldn't expose a person to more radiation than needed or anything like this. But actually, in oncology, including radiation oncology, RCTs are widely used. For example, compare different regimens, like one, say, standard fractionation regimen versus something that has more fractions or less fractions with bigger size. That is done very commonly. Or, for example, if radiation treatment is the same in both arms, but the chemo drug is different. In arm A, you have this chemo drug, and in arm B, you have this chemo drug. So that's definitely done, but it has a lot of limitations. I think we mentioned that ethics, time and resource constraints too, but also the patients that sign up for the trials or are included by criteria are often not the same as the patients that generally come to the hospital. So there is a kind of external applicability issue, a gap. So for that, definitely these quasi-causal methods are important, the causal inference methods. Definitely, you know, there are many options, but because of what I mentioned before, that the data is very rich usually. Like even if you don't integrate, for example, the multiple modalities, like images and text, if you just go with tabular data, there is a lot of tabular data as well, usually. Even just the clinical features could be like, say, stage of disease, exact location of disease, subtype, maybe some molecular markers, age and sex, you know, some lifestyle factors. Do they smoke or how much, or did they quit smoking? Or, so kind of the number of potentially relevant features, comorbidities, you know, of the patient, what other diseases they might have, and so on, becomes usually quite large for traditional methods to handle. Like, for example, it's usually difficult to put that in, say, a linear regression, because you will have collinearity. So it's relatively common for people to do predictive modeling with regularization of some kind, like regularized Cox regression, or that's very common. But that doesn't give you, of course, the causal insight. So for the causal insight, I think these causal ML methods, like I keep saying, are very promising because they can focus on the parameter you want, like say average treatment effect, but the nuisance function modeling can be multidimensional. It can model these different features by flexible machine learning methods or ensembles of methods. So I think that's quite useful and promising in this area.
Understood. They say that, you know, counterfactuals are the cornerstone of establishing causality. What counterfactuals do you consider in radiation oncology?
Yes, of course. This is the main problem in causal inference, that you cannot observe what would happen if you give the person a different treatment or placebo and so on. You can only observe one outcome for each person. So in a sense, every kind of clinical decision is a counterfactual question. What if I change the protocol? What if I change the dose? What if I postpone this treatment for later, just observe for now? So you cannot model both realities in this. And this is kind of modeling this, the counterfactual is a foundation, I think, of causal modeling in this field.
I think you have published on non-targeted bystander effects, radiation carcinogenesis, etc. How do you test causal hypothesis about mechanisms when many processes are, you know, latent or not observed at all?
Yeah, so radiation carcinogenesis, I think I mentioned that this is radiation damaging cells, mostly damaging DNA, inducing breaks and inducing mutations. And for example, sometimes chromosomes can be broken and then repaired in wrong ways. And this can lead to cancer potentially. Bystander effects is actually interesting, and it was a little bit controversial for a while, even in the radiation field, but I think now it's more accepted. meaning that if radiation doesn't hit all the cells, like it's targeted to a specific region, or even it's stochastic on the micro level, like, for example, in space radiation exposures, there are tracks of ions that go through some cells, but not all cells. But cells that are not directly hit can still respond in some ways, like they feel the effects from the hit cells through various signaling. Because, of course, biology and biochemistry is complex and cells communicate, they're not independent. And these signals can even go a long way, like they can go through the blood to other regions. And a related concept in oncology is called the abscopal effect, which is sometimes noticed, for example, that the patient can have a primary tumor and some metastatic sites where the tumor spread. So if the primary tumor is irradiated locally, but the metastatic sites are not, and they receive essentially zero exposure, in some cases they can start to regress as well, like those cells start to die. So of course you cannot explain this by direct targeting, so it means that signaling, immune system or other mechanisms which are researched heavily. So models of this can help as well to figure out what's going on and potentially to optimize treatments using this information. So what I was doing is to build mechanistic models of the biological processes that we think are affecting this, based on experimental data, based on scientific knowledge. And this involves cell growth, cell death, DNA repair, signaling pathways. And then you can introduce some of these concepts or outputs of these models and test them using causal inference methods. For example, recently, actually, we wrote a paper on head and neck cancer where we tried to combine some of these mechanistic concepts with ML. And the mechanistic concept, for example, in head and neck cancer, because those tumors are fast growing, it's known for a long time that the tumor repopulates during the treatment. The standard treatment takes several weeks, and between the fractions, so this day the patient gets a fraction, the next day gets a fraction, and on weekends there are no fractions typically. The cells have some time to grow back. But the details of this repopulation are not completely understood. So we compare two options where repopulation is kind of independent of intensity of radiation, or it's dependent, or it compensates for intensity of radiation. And this produces different metrics, like it's called biologically effective dose, under these different repopulation scenarios. So we use that as an engineered feature and use that as a treatment in a causal model with other covariates, and use the big observational data set to check which of these is better and what it will produce. So that's an example.
Yeah, that was very well explained. When we talk about causality, of course, there are two things that people often get confused about. One is causal discovery, and the other is causal identification. Can you talk about this in a bit?
Yes, of course. So causal discovery is a very ambitious and difficult task, essentially to take the data that you have and try to discover what the causal relationships are. So essentially draw a DAG given the data. And there are many algorithms that are doing this, and this is a rapidly evolving field. And I think also LLMs can probably start to help here. I'm not sure, I mean, at the current stage, if they're very good at doing this, but intuitively, it seems to make sense that LLMs can help because they have external knowledge. They're trained
Mhm.
essentially on the whole internet, so they read literature from before. So if you give a data set, they might be able to understand kind of what domain this data set belongs in and what's known about that domain and so on. So they could guide purely data-driven algorithms. But I think even now, the algorithms that exist produce sometimes reasonable results. Like they produce a skeleton structure that maybe say 80% correct and maybe 20% suspect, and then the human would look and think more carefully and maybe tweak some of these edges, remove some of them, change some of them. So I think at the current stage it's kind of like this, but I'm not an expert in causal discovery. And causal inference or identification is coming at the same problem, but with an a priori causal structure. So in a sense, you draw the DAG first, you think through it. What is your hypothesis? What is your knowledge about what is causing what and what are the confounders? Identify them, what are colliders, mediators, and so on. And given this structure and set of assumptions like no unmeasured confounding or overlap and whatever, you would then proceed to analyze the data. So in medicine specifically, or in biology, usually causal inference can be done because usually we know a considerable amount of information already about the disease, about how to treat the disease. Kind of, we're not starting from scratch in a completely data-driven way, but we want to focus on the treatment effect, the average effect, and also often on the heterogeneous effect to see what are the subgroups. Like that is an important question as well, because that's often found that not every patient responds the same way. Even the sign can be different. So, older men might respond to the same treatment in a different sign than younger women or something of this sort.
Yeah, that was about to be my next question. Of course, there are a lot of causal estimates like ATE, average treatment effect, and there is ATT, average treatment effect on the treated. Then there is also ATU, average treatment on the untreated. And of course, you have CATE, that is conditional average treatment effect, and LAT as well. This is probably a naive question. I understand that, human physiology is different from person to person. And I assume that, radiation will have different effects on different people. Do you think in such a scenario, taking into consideration ATE, average treatment effect, is accurate? Or perhaps you should, focus more on CATE or other estimates? What's your opinion on that?
Yes, that's very, very important question, and I think you're right. So ATE, of course, is important to know overall, and in clinical trials, this is important, and this is what the randomized trial will give you. So I think for decisions about adopting or not adopting such a treatment, that's usually what is used. But to go beyond that is also important. Something like conditional average treatment effect, like CATE, CATE, definitely important and interesting. I think this is more and more realized also because all kinds of biomarkers and genetic markers, and not even of the patient, but also of the tumor. Like, for example, you can genotype the tumor and see what's going on there. What kind of mutations does the tumor have? And that could have a big impact on the response to treatment. Because in a tumor, what's going on is actually a very complex evolution. It's thought that most tumors arise from one cell, like it's one clonal lineage at the beginning, although that's often also not necessarily the case, but often. But then, as it starts to grow more, mutations accumulate and epigenetic changes accumulate. So it becomes a population that's heterogeneous and that evolves in different ways. And also even the environment inside is changing. Like if the tumor becomes bigger, the inside region, like say if it's a sphere, inside of the sphere, blood may not get completely inside because it's not a normal organ. The blood vessel supply is not normal, it's kind of chaotic. So the inside might start to die, and there might be region deprived of oxygen and nutrients, partially or completely. So why I'm saying this is that there is a lot of heterogeneity inside tumors many times, and complex evolution and competition, the way that these cells try to get more food, more oxygen to them, or adapt to low oxygen and low food conditions and still keep growing. Like they're parasites, essentially, that are derived from the host, but they keep changing and changing. So knowing this becomes much and much more accessible with more cheaper sequencing and other technologies. So this information can be fed in and can be used to see what is going on. So every patient is different, every tumor is different. So potentially, yes, this CATE identification, where CATE would be a function of the covariates, and that's what you want to estimate, and preferably in some very flexible way. That I think is a very important task.
Very interesting. You had also shared an article on LinkedIn some time ago titled Causal Effects of Non-Intervention Features in Healthcare. Of course, it was written by somebody else. Is there a distinction between observing and intervening on such features?
Yes, this is interesting question that I think is controversial, because definitely there are in these biomedical settings, there are a lot of features or characteristics, say, of the person, like age or something like body mass index, or maybe even disease state, like size of the cancer and so on, which intuitively should have a causal effect on the outcome. Like, say, a bigger tumor is likely to have a worse outcome than a smaller tumor. So it's kind of tempting to estimate a causal effect of something like tumor size on survival. But the conceptual issue is that tumor size or age is not an intervention, it's not a treatment, really. Because, for example, if it's something like age, you cannot change a person's age. And see what would happen, what would be effective making this patient 10 years older. And for something like tumor size, you can change it by intervening. But the trickiness is that you can change it by different ways. For example, you can do surgery on the tumor, just cut it out with margins. You can irradiate the tumor and shrink it. You can use chemotherapy on the tumor. And the result, for example, is technically the same, like say you reduce the tumor size essentially to zero, but the outcome can be different. The causal effect of using surgery or chemotherapy might be different, even though you did the same thing to the tumor. So I think it's tricky. I'm not completely sure what the answer is. There are competing schools of thought on this. But I think probably it's safer not to do it, to treat these things as covariates rather than treatments. And then, for example, to see if these things are related to heterogeneity of the treatment effect.
Understood. Yeah, that was very well explained. We earlier talked about double ML, ML plus causal inference. Let us dive deep into this topic a little bit more. You have also, shared articles around causal forest. Would you like to explain what is a causal forest?
Mhm. Yes, so definitely I should say there are many different causal inference frameworks that use ML. It's not only these two, it's not only DML and causal forest. There's also like TMLE, there are others.
Mhm.
I'm not saying that these are particularly the best, but I practice more with them or read more about them.
Mhm.
So double machine learning, I guess I could start a little bit to say what that is and then what causal
Yeah.
forest is and then to combine them. Um, so the idea of double machine learning, and this was created by the group at MIT, Dr. Chernozhukov and that group, and also other collaborators, Dr.
Mhm.
Spindler from Germany, for example. So the idea is that you want to estimate some causal parameter like ATE, and you want to estimate it with good statistical properties to get confidence intervals on it. But the confounders, uh, so-called nuisance models, the models for treatment and for the outcome, can become very complex. Like I
Mhm.
was saying before, in the biomedical setting, there are many different features
Mhm.
and potentially multimodal. And you, a priori, you don't know really how these features interact.
Mhm.
It's likely that it's nonlinear, it's likely that they can have complex interactions with each other. So the rationale behind DML is you could use cross-fitting, like meaning data splitting, and fit these nuisance models for the treatment as function of covariates and
Mhm.
outcome as function of covariates separately. So that's
Mhm.
why it's called double, because
Yep.
you're doing two separate models instead of one. But what's nice also is that you're not really restricted to a specific model type. You can use linear regression if you want, but you can use also random forests or gradient boosting, or you can use neural networks if you want.
Mhm.
It's essentially anything that's appropriate for a predictive problem with that data type.
Mhm.
So, for example, if your treatment is binary or continuous, you could use something, like random forest for binary prediction with a lot of features to predict that and so on.
Mhm.
And if your outcome is, continuous, you could use something for continuous. Uh, and then the next important step is that you compute residuals from these models. So kind of predicted minus actual values
Mhm.
separately. And then you relate these residuals to each other by a special score function,
Mhm.
which creates this property called Neyman Orthogonoality.
Mhm.
So essentially, you're regressing the outcome residuals on
Mhm.
the treatment residuals.
Mhm.
And this would give you the parameter estimate, the ATE estimate.
Mhm.
And the nice thing is that it has this double robustness property, meaning that if either of these nuisance models is not correctly specified, but the other one is correctly specified, then the final estimate is correct. So not both of them need to be absolutely correctly specified to work. In reality, of course, they're never going to be, like neither of them will be absolutely correct. I mean, it's pretty sure of that. But they can be relatively close.
Mhm.
So the double robust estimate of the causal parameter will be insensitive to first order inaccuracies in these
Mhm.
models. That's the idea. And then, so the original intent of this was focused on average treatment effect.
Mhm.
Causal forest was focusing actually on heterogeneous treatment effect.
Mhm.
So its approach was kind of from the different side, and it was using trees. So the same concept as Bremen's random forest
Mhm.
to split the feature space using decision trees. So basically binary splits. If the feature is above something, you go this way. If it's below something, you go that way. And you create many trees. So you could think of it this way, that it's kind of a multi-dimensional space of features, and you're splitting it into small rectangular voxels.
Mhm.
Within each voxel, you have certain values of all the features. But the traditional random forest is splitting based on mean squared error or some other prediction relevant criteria like that. But this causal forest is splitting, trying to maximize the variance of the treatment effects between leaves of the forest. So within each voxel, the treatment effect should be constant, but between different voxels, it should be as different as possible. That's the idea. And then I think what's interesting is that these are not mutually exclusive and kind of not orthogonal to each other. Actually, they can be merged in a convenient way. And one implementation of this is in the EconoML library
Mhm.
by Microsoft in Python. There is an estimator which is called Causal Forest DML, which does exactly this. It
Mhm.
combines both methods. So basically, it's doing the nuisance function modeling and cross-fitting the
Mhm.
same way as the DML would do. And you don't have to use forest for that. You can use whatever you want. And
Understood.
then you do the residualization
Mhm.
the same way as for DML. But instead of the final regression of residuals versus residuals, like a linear regression, you can use a causal forest estimator on the residuals and covariates from the previous steps. And why you would want to do that is that give you a CATE function.
Mhm.
That the forest method would estimate in a flexible way the CATE as a function, of the covariates. And I think this is a nice way to do an automated kind of subgroup heterogeneity
Mhm.
analysis. And it still would give you ATE if you want,
Mhm.
but it would give you estimates for each patient, but the estimates would not be the same. And then you could analyze that further the way you want.
Understood. Yeah, these are indeed very novel methods. I'm sure, the audience will benefit from this, definitely. Moving along, what is your opinion on synthetic control methods? Can it be used in radiology oncology?
Yes, synthetic control is a powerful method for sure, and definitely it can be used. So synthetic control is if you have a treated unit. Uh, I think usually it can be uh, a unit in a sense like a hospital or some kind of grouped level. It doesn't have to be, but usually that's what it is. Uh, but then you don't have an untreated unit like a control arm,
Mhm.
but you have several uh, kind of similar units. Like, for example, one hospital changed its policy somehow. Like they introduced maybe a new treatment protocol, but other hospitals in the same town didn't.
Mhm.
And you're monitoring some kind of aggregate metric, like how many patients have positive outcomes over time or something like this. And the trajectory, you have the trajectory over time for the hospital where you changed the policy and also for others where you didn't. But how do you know once you change the policy in this hospital, say the trajectory changed visually, like you could see it's deviating. But how do you know, like, what would the counterfactual be if you didn't change it? So then you're you're making a weighted average trajectory of the untreated hospitals. And the weighted average is kind of an interpolation of trajectories of the untreated units over the time before you introduce the treatment in the treated unit. You want it to match as well as you can. And then you project that synthetic control trajectory over the time when the treatment was introduced and subtract the observed trajectory of the treated unit and this counterfactual trajectory. And that's what you would get as an effect. So at the policy level, you could do it. You could also do it for a clinical trial type of context, especially if it's a rare type of disease. And you have some patients with the rare disease, but it's unethical or difficult to find controls. So there you can make synthetic control arm population in a sense based on historical controls and some observational data. So that's where. There is also one concept which is not completely the same, but it's kind of related and it's becoming very popular actually in medicine. It's a digital twin. So, I mean, in synthetic control, you're kind of making a twin population or a twin unit. But digital twin is, the idea is you're making it really like a twin patient, like a digital model of what's going on in the patient, and preferably not a generic patient, but this one. And that can use also combinations of ML and mechanistic modeling.
Understood. Very interesting. I think people can definitely look up digital twin in medical research for sure. Let's play a small game, Dr. Igor. We play this game with all the participants. This is called the Rate the Causal Assumptions game. I'm going to share my screen and you can let me know whether, causal assumptions surrounding these particular causal methods are, reasonable, unreasonable, or impossible. Yeah. So let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I'll enlarge a little bit, 1 second. DID parallel trends, SCM.
Yeah, so let's begin with the DID's parallel trends. Do you think this particular assumption is reasonable, unreasonable, or impossible?
Yeah, so parallel trends for DID, I think it's actually reasonable, and you can check it in the pre-treatment data. So I think for that reason, it's reasonable generally.
Okay. We just touched upon synthetic control methods. What do you think about synthetic control methods, synthetic twin assumption? Is it reasonable, unreasonable, or impossible?
Yes, I think actually it can be very reasonable as well. If you have sufficient data for the pre-treatment period, I think it can be very reasonable.
Got it. Okay. What about SATWA, stable unit treatment?
Yes, I think also usually reasonable. For example, in clinical trials, unless there is some kind of spillover, I mean, usually it's okay as far as I think.
Got it. What about PSM, perfect balancing in propensity score matching? Do you think is it reasonable, unreasonable, or impossible?
Yeah, this I think is towards the unreasonable side, like perfect matching. Because also I should say that in these messy medical data sets, you often can get extreme propensity scores, close to 0 or close to 1, and you have to do something about that. So perfect matching, not really common.
Got it. Coming to the last one, sharp cutoff rule in regression discontinuity design.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's often reasonable unless there is some kind of manipulation, like the person can manipulate where they are relative to the threshold. But if it's something like based on age or birth date or some kind of score on some kind of evaluation where the subject cannot change it, I think it's then reasonable.
Understood. Yeah, so that was pretty quick. Thanks, Dr. Igor. So let's move back to the questions. Yeah, I just have a couple of more questions. Where do you see the biggest causal inference or experimentation gaps in medical or radiation research currently?
Yes, that's a very important, I think, question to talk about. So I think there are several issues that come to mind from a kind of interdisciplinary background. One is, I think there is a collaboration communication gap. So basically, the ML world, if you can call it, like ML experts and practitioners and developers, and the mechanistic modeling world, like more traditional modelers who work, say, in oncology or use statistically based simpler models, they don't seem to communicate very well. There is not as much integration, I think, as could potentially be, and integration could improve interpretability of this work, of these models. There is also some methods gaps. I think, for example, for the causal inference, especially the ML-centric methods, I think some gaps are from difficulties in the real world data. Like, for example, there is often more than one treatment in real oncology. Like, for example, a patient could get surgery, then could get radiation, then could get chemotherapy. Then could get maybe radiation again for a metastatic site, then could get chemotherapy again. So these are dynamic regimes, not a priori decided often, but say initially decide to do this plan, but then the patient developed this and this complication, the plan is altered. So it's a dynamic plan where the next step is altered by past information. And so you need some kind of joint causal modeling of multiple treatment variables, which could be synergistic. For example, with chemotherapy and radiation, it's known that specific chemotherapy drugs are radiosensitizers. So they cause types of damage to the cells, which make it harder to repair radiation damage as well. But some can be purely additive and so on. So you need joint modeling. I think currently it's not very well developed, although I don't know the full extent. Also, for survival outcomes with censoring, that's a tricky issue too, because in oncology, that's a very relevant endpoint, like overall survival, but also disease-specific, like progression-free survival. That's often reported, often modeled by Cox regression and such methods, which are, of course, predictive. But also the censoring mechanism can be complex, can be informative, depend on some covariates. So I think there is a need to have better methods that are flexible, that can model joint treatments and survival outcomes. Then I think there is also always, I encounter this a lot, that people are distrustful of the causal inference methods because they're more used to evaluating predictive ML, where you have the ground truth and the test set, and you can show what is your RMSE or some other metric, ROC curve on the test set. But if they hear that, for these causal methods, the true effect is unknown, you cannot just give them an estimate with, a standard error. they're distrustful of this. How did you get this? How did you check that this is correct? So I think this kind of robustness and validation with semi-synthetic data, synthetic data, simulations, sensitivity analysis exists, but probably that can be improved a lot to be more realistic and to communicate this better to the community.
Understood. Yeah, last question, Dr. Igor. For somebody, looking to dive into causal thinking, especially for radiation oncology and of course biology or medicine, what resources would you recommend?
Well, specifically for the causal stuff, actually the first book that I read on this was by Mateusz Facura, this causal inference for the brave and true. I found it online and I thought it's very well written as an introduction, but of course, finding it for me was kind of random, so I'm not saying it's probably the best introduction, but I think it's one of the good ones.
Yeah, I agree. We have had him on the show already. Yeah.
Yes, and of course I read a lot of his work. I mean, I think it's nice introduction because it's free, online, and it describes all the techniques from the beginning, from the basic concepts, all these methods, and then goes into the more complex methods at the end. Also, the next thing that I looked into is the Book of Why, of course, by Dr. Pearl, who is one of the godfathers of the causal inference field. So the reason to look into that is for more theoretical insights and the DAGs and the do calculus. So that explains these concepts on a theoretical level very well, and these levels of causation very well. Also, one other thing is the Scott Cunningham mixtape book, more economics-centric, but also freely accessible and with practical examples. So that's what I would think. But mainly, it depends on what the person wants to do. But the way I was kind of proceeding with this, because I didn't have any formal training in it, I was just proceeding on my own. So I started playing with DAGs to draw DAGs for some problems that make sense. Look at what those confounders, colliders are, and then to just jump into practicing with these methods. So because I had previous experience with, say, predictive ML, I started just making, Jupyter notebooks or some R codes, playing with these packages. And one that I mentioned is EconML. There is also a very nice double ML package in Python and in R, which has a lot of examples, a lot of tutorials, a lot of code examples that you can run. And in R, there is a nice package called GRF, Generalized Random Forests, which has causal forests, and it has a lot of other stuff too, a lot of other applications of forests, but including these. And I think those are user-friendly and nice to play with.
Yeah. These have been really excellent resources, Dr. Igor, and thanks for your time today. This was really wonderful. For the first time, we have had a clinically certified doctor who also happens to be a PhD, sharing with us a lot of wisdom about radiation oncology. At least for me, this was really insightful. So thank you so much, Dr. Igor.
Thank you very much. I am honored to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you.